These videos were created for you to watch along. They'll teach you about ClientTrack so you know what's going on. So best of luck with all of your data. Now here's your HMIS system administrator.
Hello and welcome to the Georgia HMIS new user training video. This is the required user training video for anyone that requests a user account in Georgia HMIS. This video is broken up into 8 sections, as we can see listed on the screen here. So we'll cover how to log into the system and basic navigation, how to enroll a client, how to record services as well as referrals, how to do annual and during program enrollment assessments, how to exit a client, how security and client confidentiality work within the system, and finally, how to submit issues when you're having a problem in the system. Each of these videos is also available separately on our YouTube channel, so I invite you to access the videos in that way in the future if you would like to have a refresher or use them as a reference. Also, I wanted to mention these 8 sections right here are not all the training videos that we've created. We've actually created a good bit more. This is just the minimum required videos for you to watch to have a new user account. So I also invite you to check out the other videos that we have on the YouTube channel, as they can be a great resource to continuing to learn the system better. And finally, all correspondence in regards to new user accounts, so that includes requesting new user accounts as well as sending in the required documentation, should all be sent straight to DCA using the email address that's on the screen, which is gahmissupport@dca.ga.gov. That being said, we'll go ahead and jump into the training. In this training video, I'll be going over login and basic navigation within ClientTrack. To use ClientTrack, you'll want to open up a web browser. The latest versions of Firefox, Internet Explorer, and Chrome should all work. However, we do recommend Chrome as it seems to work a little bit smoother than the rest of them. You can also pull up ClientTrack through your mobile web browsers, either through your smartphones or your tablets. The web address you'll want to key in is www.clienttrack.net/GAHMIS. Once you key in that, you should get to a screen that looks like this. Your username is always going to be your email address. And then if this is your first time logging into ClientTrack, you should have been given a temporary password from your admin. So you'll want to go ahead and type in that temporary password here and then click sign in. Because that was just a temporary password, it will make you create a brand new password the first time you log in, and this new password must be at least 8 characters, have at least 1 capital letter, 1 number, and 1 non-letter number character. So we'll go ahead and create a brand new password here, and then we'll click change my password. You'll then see these options here. The first one is work group. These 2 options should be available to you. One is HMIS programs, one is street outreach. If you are trying to do work for a street outreach project, you'll definitely want to be sure that you are logged in as the street outreach work group. Everyone else would want to go logged in as the HMIS programs work group. Work groups determine what options you have available to you within the system. Organization will be the next option here. You should be able to see your organization listed here, and depending on your admin role, you might have the opportunity to select different organizations here. It is important, if you do have the option of multiple organizations, to select the one that's appropriate for the work you're going to be doing. So if you are going to go enroll a client into a specific agency, you want to be logged in as that agency. And that also goes for if you're recording case notes or services, anything to do with a specific agency, please be sure to be logged in as that agency. Also note, depending on what agency you're logged in as, it also determines the security model of the system. And so for instance, if you were logged in as one agency or organization, you might not be able to see a client's enrollment within a different organization. So once we select the appropriate organization, we'll want to click on Use these settings. And now if this is the first time you're using ClientTrack, you might not get this pop-up here because your web browser might have a pop-up blocker set up on it and actually block this screen from coming up. So if you don't see this screen and you're still stuck on this screen, I'd recommend looking up here in the top right. You'll probably see a little notification here that pop-up has been blocked, and usually there's an option to allow it, and also sometimes an option, depending on what web browser you have, an option to allow it in the future or to never block ClientTrack pop-ups. And so I definitely recommend using that option. That way going forward you won't ever have to worry about this being blocked. So this is the ClientTrack interface. I'm going to go ahead and maximize this window. The first thing you'll want to do when you first log into ClientTrack is set up what's called your security question. Setting up your security question will allow you in the future to reset your password if you were to forget it. To set up your security question, you'll click on your username, which will be in the top right hand side of the screen. You'll then click on Change Password. You'll then click on I want to update my recovery information. This area would be blank if you have not set this up, and this button would say Set. And when you click on Set, you would then type in a question and then type in an answer to that question and go ahead and click Save. Once you've done that, if you are ever on the login screen here and you forget your password, you can click the Forget Your Password link and use the Retrieve Security Question option. What that will do then is it will ask you that question that you set up, and then as long as you're able to answer that correctly, it will let you reset your password. Now that we've gone through that, we can go ahead and get on to some of the navigational features of ClientTrack. So when you first log in, you are taken to what's called the home workspace. And you can tell it's the home workspace by looking at the top left here and you'll see home. Workspaces kind of function like tabs, and on each tab or workspace you will have different menu options here and also different menu groups. So these would be the menu groups, and then these individual things would be the menu options. If there is an arrow on a menu option, that means you can hover over it and it will give you more options, such as these. And to change workspaces, you can click this icon here with the two arrows, and it will show you the available workspaces. And so here we have the home workspace, which we're on now, and this is the client's workspace. You'll note if we switch to the client's workspace, now all of these menu options change. And if this is your first time logging into ClientTrack, this might look a little different here. You might not see all these options, and that's because there's not a current client pulled up. And the reason there's a client pulled up on mine is because this is the last client I had previously pulled up. And so ClientTrack always pulls up the last client that you have pulled up in the system. So we know we can navigate the different workspaces here, and that those are what's going to control the different menu options. And the way I like to think of it is, if you are ever working with an individual client, and that's going to be everything from doing intakes to case notes to services, anything like that, you're going to want to be on the client's workspace. If you're ever doing anything that's not to do with a particular client, but maybe multiple clients at the same time, like running a report or seeing a list of multiple clients that are enrolled in your project, then the Home tab is where you would want to be. So we'll go over a few options here on the Home tab. First off, the kind of landing page when you first log in is the user dashboard. And you can also always get back to the user dashboard by clicking on user dashboard here. What this does is it has what's called the bulletin board up top here. This is where system admins can leave notes here, and so you can see we've got some links to some of the other training videos we have created, and we'll also add some other news items here. So this is always a good thing to keep an eye on. You'll also have an overview of your different projects and how many people are enrolled in them. And then you will also see a list of any clients you have currently assigned to you. If you click on Recent, that will pull up the last 5 clients that you have pulled up. If you click on My User Configuration, or actually hover over My User Configuration, and then click on My Information, this is where you can update your name, your email, your office phone number. And it is important that this information is correct, because for instance when you submit an issue, we are able to see what phone number you have listed, and if we need to reach out to you, that's the phone number we'll call. So you definitely want to make sure that information is accurate. If you click on paused operations, you'll see any paused forms or paused workflows. This will make a little bit more sense when you get further into the training videos. Under training documentation, this contains some important documents from DCA in regards to HMIS. If you look on current enrollments, this will give you an option to select one of your projects, and it will list all of the clients that are currently enrolled in that project. Also, some of the options on the home workspace, for instance, will automatically direct you to the client workspace. For instance, these are a list of clients we know are enrolled in this project, and if I were to click on one of these icons, it's going to pull up this client's record, and it's going to automatically take me over to the client's workspace to do that. So if I click here, we'll notice this changed to client, and now in what's called our entity toolbar here, this lists the client's name and some of their information. And regardless of what we're doing on the client's workspace, whether we are doing case notes or services or have a particular form pulled up, is always going to list the client that you are currently working with right here. And if we go back to home, you'll note that this changes. This will be your actual name, and then it will list what organization you are logged in as and what work group you are logged in as. Another option of the navigation in ClientTrack allows you to add frequently used forms as favorites. And this will allow you to be able to access certain forms quickly. So for instance, if there is a specific report that I find myself running a lot, you'll notice there is a star icon here. If I click on Add to Favorites, and then it would allow me to rename that if I wanted to. I can set up parent folders, so basically there's submenus that these favorites are listed as. Right now I'm just going to do no parent and click Save. You'll note now Clients and Programs is listed up here. So this is a way I can now quickly access that. Same way works for the client's workspace. If there is an assessment I do a lot and I want to be able to pull that up, then I could go ahead and go into this, click Add to Favorites, Save, and now I'm going to have this under my favorites here. You can also modify these by right-clicking, hitting Remove, and it'll take that away. Same way on the home workspace. Another feature of the menu, the side menu here, is you'll notice there is a thumbtack right here. If I were to click this, it would allow me to auto hide this menu. This is good if you have a smaller screen and really want to utilize your screen for the work you're doing here instead of these menu options. So if I click on the thumbtack, now when I click over here, it will make the menu disappear. And that will do the same thing on the Clients tab. So you'll see here we have all this space here. If I click over here, it will pull up the full menu. A few other things in closing. If you click your username on the top right here, you can change what work group you are in, as well as if you have access to different organizations, you can change that. You can also change the theme. Some people find a lighter theme easier to see, so if I were to change that and hit apply, it'll brighten it up a little bit. You can reset your password here by clicking change password, put in what you want for your new password, type it in again, and then type in your current password and click change password. That would allow you to do that. Regardless of what workspace you're on, you can use what's called the global search up here to search for forms, reports, and clients. So it's a great way to quickly pull up clients. You can type in their name, hit enter, it'll pull up any possible matches. You can click on that and it will pull up that client. And like I said, that works regardless if you're on the clients or if you're on the home tab or workspace as they call it. And when you click on that client though, then it will go ahead and take you over to the client's workspace. You can also type in partial searches here. It'll pull up anything that matches. So sometimes that'll be faster, just type in the first two letters of the first name and last name. You can also type in the client ID. Client ID numbers are listed right here. And if you were to type that into the search here, then it would go ahead and pull up the client by that ID. So that's all the basic navigational things within ClientTrack. Hopefully that filled you in on that. And as always, if you have any questions, you can always click the help button here and ask a question, report an issue, or make a suggestion. In this video, we'll be going over how to do an intake within ClientTrack. Doing an intake is how we initially enroll a client into one of our projects. The first thing we'll want to do after logging into the system is switch over to the client's workspace. To switch workspaces, you can click this icon right up here, and then you'll want to click on the client's workspace here. The next step on enrolling a client is a very important step. Because this is a shared database, there's a good chance that the client we're trying to enroll might already exist within the system. And if that's the case, we want to search for that client, pull that client record up, and enroll them. We don't want to just go create a brand new client, which would then be a duplicate client in the system. The only reason we would want to go directly to creating a client record, regardless if they already exist in the system, would be for the cases where a client refuses to sign a consent form, and so they don't want any of their information shared, including their basic demographic information. So if that's the case, we would create a brand new client record, and then we could go in and totally restrict that record from being seen in the system, so no one else would know that client exists at all. The reason we would not want to go start a project intake on a pre-existing client that we would try to restrict later on is because we can't go in and restrict a pre-existing client, because if we did that, the original agency that created them would not be able to see that record anymore. So again, only in cases where the client is not sharing their most basic demographics, would we go create a brand new client without first searching to see if they already exist in the system. So we're going to say the client has at least signed the consent form to share their basic demographics. So I'm going to click Find Client up here, and we're going to start the search process. The first thing we're going to ask you to do is search by social security number. So I'm going to go ahead and type in that. You can then click Enter or on your keyboard, or click the search button here, and this will bring up any possible matches. The reason we ask that you type in social security number first is, in theory, there should only be one client tied to one specific social security number, so a lot of times this is the fastest way to pull up a client record. If we see our client listed here, which we can verify by birth date and first and last name, we would go ahead and click on them, and then we would go ahead and continue the intake process. However, if we do not see our client here, we don't want to just stop searching and go create a brand new client. We want to search a little further. So the next thing you would search by would be the birth date. Also, it's important here, before we go search for this birth date, we want to actually delete the social security number. Reason being, if I go ahead and click search here, it might not bring up any results. So it says no records found. But if I get rid of the social security number, we can see there actually is a client with this birth date. The reason it didn't show up previous is because it was searching for someone that had this birth date and a matching social security number. So the more information we type in here, then the more restrictive it's going to be on a client having to match all those fields. That's why we just want to search for one field at a time. If, however, at this stage we still do not see our client listed here, the final thing we'd want to do is just search by first and last name. Something that might be helpful sometimes, depending on the name, is you can do partial name searches. So for instance, if there's a name that is commonly misspelled, I could, if I wanted to, just type the first couple of letters and it would bring up any possible matches. And then again, I would always verify based on social security number and birth date that this is the client I am trying to pull up. And if that was the case, you would click on that client. We would see that we have the client pulled up here. Then we would click on Project Intake, and we would say use the current client. And then it's automatically going to have all this information filled out, saving you a lot of time, but also it will allow you to edit any of this information. So I really recommend double checking social security number, birth date, the name spelling, and if any of this is incorrect, then we could go ahead and update it and then click finish and continue on in the intake process. However, we're going to say for training that we're going to actually put in a client that has not been created in the system, so you can see what that looks like. Few things before we dig back into doing an intake. You'll notice there's two buttons up here. There's the project intake. This is going to be for most project types except RHI, which is Runaway Homeless Youth. We see this button right here. If you are a RHI project, you'll want to use this button. And if you are a street outreach project, you'll actually want to click your username up here. And here you actually want to switch to a different work group. You'll want to be under street outreach. And if we're under the street outreach work group, you're actually going to see a different option here. You'll see the street outreach intake. So for street outreach projects, this would be what you'd want to use. Again, for everyone else, you just want to be under HMIS programs using this button, unless you are a Runaway Homeless Youth program. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Project Intake. We always want to enroll the head of household first. So if we're enrolling a family, we're going to start by keying in the person that considers themselves the head of household. And then we're going to say this is a brand new client. So the first step it is going to do here is it is going to do another search just to make sure that this client does not exist. Here it's totally fine to just type in a first and last name and then click next. We'll see any possible matches. If, however, these are not already, one of these is not the person we are trying to enroll, then we would just go ahead and click next. And if we click next, it says click next if this is not a duplicate. It's going to go ahead and then allow us to create a brand new client record. So I want to go ahead and click next. It'll go ahead and bring in the first and last name and then have us fill out all the other information here. So throughout ClientTrack you'll see asterisks for things that are required, and then you'll also see some fields without asterisks. So for instance, middle name, you can include a middle name here if you want to, but it is not required. But if that's helpful for your agency to know, you're totally welcome to do so. For names, you always want to use legal names. You do not want to use street names or nicknames, that kind of thing. Reason being, if you, for instance, use a nickname here, but next time a agency goes to try to pull this client up to do an intake, they might use a legal name, well then it might not cross-reference and a duplicate might be created in the system. So again, we want to always use legal names here. Throughout ClientTrack you'll see quality fields, and so this first one here is name quality. If you have the first and last name filled out, it's automatically going to populate to full name reported. However, you can go in and change that. For instance, if all the client was giving you was a street name or just a partial name, they didn't want to give you their full name, you could go in and set that to this option here. You'll also see throughout ClientTrack these options here. So client doesn't know, if a client says they do not know the question you are asking them, they don't know the answer to it, you can choose that. Client refused for questions the client refuses to answer. And then finally, data not collected. This would be something you really want to avoid at all costs if possible. This just means you did not bother to gather this information. We'll go ahead and type in social security number. Also, if someone only will give the last 4 of their social security number, you don't want to type in any bogus information here. So I know sometimes I see in the system where people have just typed in zeros and then they'll do the last 4. You'll actually just leave those blank and you can just do the last 4 like that. For a birth date, we've got the date field here, so we can easily type in the date here, or we can use this to choose a birth date. This will automatically populate, as we can see here, to full date of birth reported. If, for instance, someone did not know their date of birth, but they had an approximate, maybe they just know the year, you could do something like this and just use January 1st as a default, but then put the year and then choose approximate so that we know this is not the actual birth date but an approximate. We'll go ahead and choose their ethnicity. Also throughout ClientTrack you will see these little help bubbles. If you hover your mouse over there, sometimes there can be some really helpful information on how to answer this question, and a lot of these little help bubbles contain information straight from the HUD documents, and so this is again a great reminder if you're confused on a question. Under the race fields here, this is actually a multiple select box, so you can select multiple races for whatever is appropriate for the client. We'll go ahead and select gender. Sexual orientation is not required for most projects, so as we can see here, there's no asterisk, so we can go ahead and skip that. we'll record the vet status. Under show address and contact information, this is not required. However, if it's helpful to record any contact information for the client, if you click that little box, you'll see this pop up here. This would allow us to record, maybe there's an email address for the client, phone number, address, anything like that you can record that's helpful. But again, it's hidden by default until you click that little box there. Down here, this is not going to let you put anything under the family, and relationship head of household is already going to be selected as self. So again, as I mentioned when we started this process, you always want to start with the head of household. And so as long as you do that, then you don't have to go in and change this at all. And again, you're not going to do anything with the family here. That's going to be blank, and you can just click finish. And once we click finish, it's going to go ahead and create the client record. And now we see our client name up here, as well as some basic demographic stuff, and our client ID number, which is generated for every client. So every client you create in the system, it'll automatically generate a client ID number. And this is a way you can, later on, you can click on Find Client, and there's an area where you can type in the client ID to quickly pull up that client. This is great for especially like common names. If there's a John Smith, instead of having to type John Smith in the future, if you note the client ID, then you can pull them up easy based on that. So at this point, the client has been created in the system. We have not enrolled them into our project or anything like that, but there is a basic client record in the system. This form here is the family members page. This is where you will have an opportunity to add family members that should be connected to this client. Something to note on this page that sometimes causes some confusion with users is if this was a client we pulled up that was already within the system, and let's say this was a person that was part of a large family that maybe checked in at a family emergency shelter a few years ago, well, we might see a lot of additional family members listed here that might not be people we are actually working with our project. And so sometimes people worry that they need to figure out a way to go in, delete them, or remove them from the family here. Actually, it's totally fine for there to be additional family members that you are not enrolling, because on the next screen it will actually give you an opportunity to select the clients that you are actually working with in your system. So that being said, if you see a list of people here that are not with the person, the head of household right now, or this family member anymore, that's totally fine. Again, on the next page you'll actually choose which ones you are enrolling. The thing you do want to make sure on this screen is that anyone you do plan to enroll that is part of this family is listed here. So if I know this client is not by themselves, they're with another family member, I would want to make sure they are listed here. That being said, you don't have to add every family member that is not currently with the client or not going to be living with the client. So for instance, if I'm enrolling a father and maybe he has 4 kids, but those kids are not staying with him right now, then I do not have to go in and create them in the system. I would just need to make sure I create a record for any client that is going to be actually enrolling into this project. So I want to go ahead and do the child's first and last name. As I continue on filling out their information, it's going to bring up a pop-up box where it automatically searches by their first and last name. The reason it does that is maybe this child was connected to a different family within the system previously, and so instead of creating a brand new record for them, it would allow me to go ahead and associate that pre-existing child record with this new person I'm creating. So if that was the case, the person would be listed here, and I could go ahead and click on them, and it would allow me to continue on in the workflow. However, for this child, it says no records found. So now I can just click cancel or exit out of it, and it's going to allow me to continue to create this child as a new client. So we'll go ahead and continue putting their information in here, and you just have to scroll over. You'll see this little scroll bar, which can sometimes be hard to see. We'll type in their information. Here's where we select how they are related to the head of household. So we'll say son. Something you might note on clients that were brought in through the migration, some client records were recorded as, or at least came over the migration as all listed as self, which is an improper record. So you might get an error message here when you try to save because, for instance, if both people were created as self, it's not going to let you continue on. You'll get this message here. There's one row in the result set that requires attention, and if you were to hover over here, you'll see a message here. The way to fix that would be to actually change everyone to not be the self, so anything other than self. Click save. We don't want to do save and close yet, or it would go ahead and continue on, so we just want to do save, and then we would want to go in and actually select the appropriate head of household. And again, you would only have to do that on migrated families where it's got an improper data for the relationship, for multiple selves for relationship to head of household. You'll note here, because it's a child under 18, it's not going to make us record veteran status. Race, it will automatically fill in based on the main head of household. However, we can change that by clicking on it, selecting the appropriate races, and then clicking accept the change here. So once we do that and we make sure we have any family members listed here, we can go ahead and click save and close. This next screen is where we're actually going to get into enrolling the client into our project. So you should see a list of any projects that your agency has access to. And again, this is going to be based on the organization that you are logged in as. So if you have access to different organizations, you always want to make sure you are logged in as the right organization, because that is going to dictate what projects you will see on the screen here. So we'll go ahead and choose a project here. Depending on the project type, you might have some different options. So for instance, if I were to do this project right here, which is a shelter, we're going to have project start date, case manager, relationship, head of household is all we're going to have here. If, however, I choose rapid rehousing, we're also going to have housing move-in date. And that's actually going to be true for any permanent housing project. So if I click on this permanent supportive housing project, we'll see that housing move-in date as well. So a little bit about the theory behind housing move-in date versus project start date. And there's actually some really good documentation on what that means. But in a nutshell, the project start date is when you first enroll, quote unquote, the client into your project. And you might not have a bed that same night to put that client directly into, but they do meet these three things here. And one of those is that the client is able to access services and housing through the project, but you might not have a bed right now, but you expect to have one in a reasonably short amount of time. And this is all straight HUD verbiage, so this is directly from the HUD guidance that has been given. So it is common now for, again, these are going to be for permanent housing projects, for them to have a start date even if you're actually not enrolling them or moving them into a bed tonight. So we'll go ahead so we can see what this looks like. We're going to go ahead and put a check mark by the clients we want to enroll. So again, this is where you might have a big list of all these family members, but there's only, say, 2 that you're actually enrolling into your project. You would just put a check mark by the ones you are wanting to enroll. And then here under project start date, this would be again when we are enrolling them into our project. If we're inputting this maybe a few days after the fact, so maybe they actually came in a couple days ago, but we're just getting now to record them in the system, then you would just go ahead and backdate that data. Quick way of doing that is just click on the calendar icon. It's automatically going to put you, whatever user account you're logged into, it will automatically pull up your name here. However, if you are just recording the information in ClientTrack, but you're not actually their case manager, you can click on the magnifying glass here and select a different case manager as long as that is a user account within the system. It's going to again allow you to record what is the relationship to head of household and the family makeup for this enrollment. So every time you do an enrollment, it allows you to potentially change the family makeup. So for instance, if there was a family in the system with a mom and a dad and children, and I'm just enrolling the mom, say I have a women and children's shelter, then when I do the enrollment here and I just select the mom and child and not the dad, then it would allow me to select her as self, even if on the previous screen it has the dad as head of household. So again, it gives that flexibility of every time you do an enrollment, what is the family makeup of the people that are actually coming into the project. And then move-in date is not going to be required. So if this client did not actually move into housing on this date or has not moved into housing by the time I do this enrollment, we would just leave that blank, and we'll cover toward the end of this video going in and actually adding that date later on. And then here at the bottom we have restrict to my organization or consent to share. These will default based on if your agency is set up as protected or not. For protected agencies, this will automatically default to restrict to my organization, which means other organizations will not be able to see that the client is enrolled into this project. They won't be able to see any of that information. And then consent to share means that they will be able to see that this client is enrolled into your project. And again, if we chose a non-permanent housing project here, then we would not have the housing move-in date would not be visible. And also you'll note it is just for the head of household, so it's only that's only a question that's going to be asked for the head of household, or at least that you have to record for the head of household. A few reasons why you might get an error message on this screen would be if we were enrolling them into an emergency shelter and they already had an active enrollment within a different emergency shelter, then you might get an error message when you go to save this, and it would actually pop up a little thing here that says this client is already enrolled in, and it'll list the emergency shelter. The reason it will cross-reference their previous project enrollments is because if they're still marked as staying at a different emergency shelter, well then they need to be exited from the emergency shelter, because you can't sleep in 2 places at once. Either they're coming into your emergency shelter or they're still at the previous one. So if you ever get an error message like that, best thing to do would, if you can, contact that shelter yourself, and that actually, it'll cross-reference emergency shelters and transitional housing, so, and safe havens, I believe. So again, if you get a message like that, then you would want to go ahead and contact the agency, say, hey, we're trying to enroll them into, our shelter, and it's not letting us because they're still enrolled in yours. If you can't get in touch with them, you can submit a ticket, and then a COC admin or system admin can try to get in touch with the agency in question to go ahead and get that client exited. But I just want to give you a heads up in case you see that error message. So we'll go ahead and click save here and continue on. The first screen that's going to come up now is the Universal Data Assessment. So this is where we get some more information about the client, where we get into like where they're staying. This is where it records if they have a disabling condition or not. So we want to record that. So we'll say they do not. The assessment date's automatically going to populate, and this should be the same date always as enrollment. So it's automatically going to copy that over. Client location is where you are serving that client at. So this should automatically give you the options that are available based on the project that you are enrolling the client into. Type of resident, so this is where it gets into where were they the night before they came into your project. So it's real important that we ask that question just like that. So the first thing is going to be type of residence, and it has 3 different categories: homeless, institutional, and then transitional and permanent. So we want to make sure we are choosing the most appropriate one. Based on this answer, there's going to be some additional questions that are asked perhaps. So for instance, if I choose homeless situation, it's going to ask me, well, what was the length of stay in that prior living situation? So if I was at an emergency shelter, or this client was at an emergency shelter, well, how long were they at that emergency shelter? And you go ahead and include that here. Then approximate date homelessness started. This is where you get into some questions that can be kind of hard to get a good answer for, because most people don't know the exact date they became homeless. And so it does say approximate here, but you want to try to get the best ideas you can. So this is really where having a conversation with the client helps out to try to get this information. You don't want to rush through any of these questions right here. And then here we get into yet again another sometimes hard to answer question. Number of times the client has been on the streets, an emergency shelter, or safe haven in the past three years, including today. So these are different episodes, if you will, of homelessness. How many have they had? And so you'll answer that. And then also the total number of months, which I feel like this is probably the hardest to get a good answer for question, because you really have to start thinking through, out of the last 3 years, how many months have they actually spent on the street or emergency shelter or safe haven. So again, you want to really kind of talk them through this and choose the appropriate answer. These are all very important questions, because this is where chronic homelessness is captured, whether the person counts as chronically homeless or not. So we want to make sure we are asking these questions. Also, we'll see real quick, if we say we choose an institutional situation, there's going to be different things populate here. So it's going to say, did you stay less than 90 days? If I say that no, I did not stay less than 90 days, then it's just going to do one more follow-up question of, well, how long was it exactly? And it's not going to ask any more questions, because this person would not be considered potentially chronically homeless if they've not been in an actual homeless situation for previous, or they've been in one of these situations for more than 90 days. But, however, maybe they were only in jail for 3 days. So if we say yes, they stayed there less than 90 days, it's going to go ahead and clarify, well, how long exactly did they stay? So we'll say 2 to 6 nights. Then it's going to ask, well, on the night before, did you stay on the streets, emergency shelter, or safe haven? So this is talking about on the night before this stay, before the night before they were in jail, were they on the streets? And if this is yes, then it's going to go ahead and bring in all those additional questions, which would then allow them to potentially count as chronically homeless. Also, something I forgot to mention here, this default client client's last assessment button. You'll see these buttons throughout the intake process. What this would do would be pull in pre-existing information if this client has already been assessed before. So the idea there is that it might save you a little time. On this particular form here, if you click that, the only thing it would pull in would be their disabling condition and their health insurance status. And again, that's only going to pull that in if they have been assessed before, and the purpose is just to save you some time. But you always want to make sure you're still, even if you use these buttons, you want to make sure this information is still accurate. So maybe they were reported that they don't have a disabling condition a year ago, and when you click on that it brings in no, but maybe they do now. So we want to be sure we're always asking the clients all of these questions. And also, it is HUD's rule that all this data that we are capturing should always be from the mouth of the client. So we would not ever assume anything about a client. We're going to ask them these questions and then record that information as such. So next thing we need to do here is health insurance. So we just want to see if the client is covered by any of these health insurances. If we chose yes here, we would then just choose which health insurance they actually have and just do a yes there. We'll go ahead and click save to continue on. And also, if you notice up here in the top left, so this is what we're doing is called a workflow, and basically what it's doing is it is going ahead and putting together all these different assessments we need to do together. So we're not having to remember or know what assessments we need to do. It's automatically doing that for us, and it walks us through all these different steps that we're taking. Now if you're ever in the middle of doing a intake like this and you need to pause it, maybe you need to go pull up a different client to check on somebody, maybe you're going to lunch, maybe you don't have all the information and you need to continue this later on, there is a pause button here. You can do this at any point during a intake workflow. If I pause it, I'll get a little pop-up that says the workflow has paused successfully. It will then take us back to what's called the client's dashboard, and then we'd be free to exit out of the system if we wanted to. We could pull up a different client, we could do whatever we want to. And then when we're ready to continue, you can always go to paused workflows. It will list any workflows you've already started, and it'll have the name of the client and the date started. You can click this little action button here and click resume, and it's going to bring you right back into it. So this is a great little feature, again, if you need to stop at any point while doing an intake. So we're on the barrier screen here. HUD requires that all clients have a barrier selection, regardless if they have a barrier or not. So what I mean by that is all of these need to either have a yes or no. The easiest way to quickly go through this is clicking this little button here, which will select them all as no, and then you can just select yes for the ones that they do have. So we would go ahead and let's say they do have one of these barriers. If we choose yes on this, there's going to be a question, is the condition indefinite? And so that's again something you would need to ask the client. Do they feel like this is something they are always going to have? And is this something that is going to majorly affect their life and potentially keep them from getting housing, that kind of thing? And we would select no or yes on that. There's also an explanation box here. If you want, you can do a kind of a case note here of maybe some details about that particular barrier that they have. And something I want to show you here is a feature to kind of help with data quality. So we can see here that disabling condition is listed here, but we also, if you remember, that question we've already answered on the universal data assessment, which was earlier in this workflow. And this automatically populated here. This is just a shortcut to the field to the question on the Universal Data Assessment. And we're about to see why we put a shortcut on this screen right here. So I want to go ahead and click Save and Close to go ahead and continue in the workflow. And we're going to get a warning message here. So we can see here there's one row in the result set that requires attention. And anytime you see that, you can look for a little exclamation point here and hover over it. And so the message we get here is it says, you have identified a special need as indefinite. This conflicts with the client's disabling condition status. Please change the special needs status so that it does not conflict, or save this form again to update disabling condition to yes. So what's happening here is we're saying the client does not have a disabling condition, but then we turn around and we say, well, they do have a mental health barrier, and that condition is indefinite. So these kind of conflict, right? Because anytime a client has a barrier present and the condition is indefinite, then they would have a disabling condition here. So we want to make sure that we are capturing that appropriately. And so that's what this little warning is saying. It's saying something's not lining up here. So instead of having to jump back all the way back to the Universal Data Assessment and say, oh, you know what, they do have a disabling condition, I just, forgot to record that, or I accidentally put that as no. You don't want to have to go all the way back. So what you can do here is you can actually just update it right here. And now this is going to line up. And now it's going to allow you to go ahead and click Save and Close and continue on in the workflow. Next we have domestic violence. If we choose no here, we don't have to answer any more questions. If you choose yes, there's going to be when experience occurred. So we would need to answer that. And then also, is the client currently fleeing? So are they actually in danger right now and actually fleeing, or is this something that just happened, a long time ago or whenever, but they're not actually fleeing it right now? And then we go ahead and click Save. Next, we're on income. So here we're going to have two required questions. The first one is income. Are they getting income from any source? And then are they getting non-cash benefits from any source? The expenses is not a required question, so you'll see no asterisk there. You're not required to record any information. If we choose no on these, you're not going to have anything else pop up here, and you'd be able to continue. If you choose yes, you'll actually then have these additional fields pop up down here. And if you choose yes on these, it will make you pick at least one source for each of these. So if I were to try to save and close here, it's going to say, well, please enter at least one income type, because again we said yes, they do have an income. On each of these you'll have a description field here. If you want to, I think it's a good idea to put their place of employment here on the earned income. For additional ones, there's not necessarily anything that I would recommend you typing in under description. And then it will make you do a monthly amount here for the cash benefits here. So if I were to save and close here, it's going to error out here because it's going to say I need to have an amount. So this should always be a monthly amount. Sometimes people get confused here and they'll put a hourly wage, which will then throw off reporting numbers. So we want to make sure that we are only putting in a monthly amount here. Also, this income should be, all of these fields should be income that they get on a regular monthly basis. So you would not record, say they just got a tax refund, you would not go and put that under other income. We're just looking at income that is being given on a monthly basis, on a regular basis that they're getting income. So I definitely encourage you to be familiar with these different options here so that you can help the client really think through, are they getting any of these benefits here? Under non-cash benefits, you will note there is a monthly amount listed here. However, on most of these it will not require that, because for instance WIC would be a great example. There's not really a monthly amount necessarily that they're getting for that. So you would go ahead and record that as an option here, but you would just leave this monthly amount blank. You'll notice a couple of options here that are blanked out. This is because these have been removed. This is data fields that HUD no longer wants to capture. Instead of us removing these though totally from the system, we cross them out for historic reasons, so we can still go in and see data that has previously been recorded under these two options. However, it will not let you save this data on ongoing enrollment. So if I were to put check marks by this, it's not going to actually save that information. So just so you know, there's no point in even asking this question or trying to record those two fields. So once we have this filled out, we can go ahead and click Save and Close. Let's see, I need to fill in an amount there. And now something just happened. If we look at the top here, we can see it no longer says the head of household's name, but now it's actually switched automatically to the child's information. So this is where it's going to go ahead and now ask any required questions for the child. And it's always going to just ask the required things. So for instance, for child, it just asks the disabling condition question, the health insurance question. Now it's asking the barriers for the child. If I do save and close, that's all it's going to ask. So it's going to save you a lot of time by just asking the required questions. So I always tell people, if you can get to the finish button, you can pretty much guarantee yourself that you have answered all the required questions. So it's really important when you're doing an intake, you want to make sure you go all the way through, get to the finish. You can go ahead and click on that. It's now going to take you to the client's dashboard. Here we can see some important information here. We can see our project name. We can see they have a project start date. So we know we have enrolled this client into this project. And also we can see they have 2 case members. So we can, if for instance we only saw one there and we knew we needed to enroll both of them, we would know that we had accidentally forgot to enroll an additional family member. You'll have housing move-in date. So again, we said it's common, especially for permanent housing projects, to have to go and add that housing move-in date later on. So this gives you a good reminder if you have recorded that, or if you need to record that, to go do that. We don't have an exit date, so we can see here this client is currently enrolled. This is not an older enrollment where they have been exited. So we can also easily see here if this person is still active, if maybe we need to go and exit them later on. So the only other thing I want to cover here is for those permanent housing projects, when we need to add the housing move-in date, the quickest way to do that is if you click the action button beside the enrollment. You can click on the update annual assessment button. This will take you straight to that program enrollment page here, and we can go ahead then and add that move-in date. So let's say they enrolled on the 27th initially, we housed them on the 30th. We could do that. You can click save, and then because we don't actually need to do an annual or during program enrollment assessment right now, we can actually just cancel out of the workflow because we've already saved the housing move-in date on the previous screen, and we can click yes. And then we can verify now they do have a housing move-in date. Also, if you have started an intake and something happened when you were not able to finish it, you can always click on the blue action button beside the enrollment, edit enrollment workflow. This will walk you through the entire workflow, but it'll have all the information you've already recorded in it. So this is a real easy way to continue on finishing a workflow if you were not able to pause it and maybe your system shut down or something like that. You can go all the way through the workflow, fill in information. Once you've got saved what you need to, you can go ahead and cancel out of the workflow. And that is all the basics to doing a project intake in ClientTrack.
In this video, I'll be going over how to record services in ClientTrack. Services are those individual things that you offer a client and record into ClientTrack, different than the initial enrollment that you do when you first see a client and enroll them into your program. So you will always need to do an enrollment first, and then services, again, are those ongoing things that you offer a client while they are enrolled into your project. There's actually several different forms within ClientTrack that allow you to record services. However, regardless of what form you use to record the service in, it will all end up in the same place. And so what I mean by that is on the client's dashboard, for instance, here you'll see the client's name and then services. This always is going to list the most recent services that the client has received. Doesn't matter which form you use to record those services on, it's going to show up here. You can also click on services here with this menu option, and it will show you a list of services as well, and also give you option to delete any services that you've recorded, as well as also edit services that you've recorded here. So the most basic way to add services is the Add New button. And so this, again, just click Services and Add New. And we'll go through this quickly. The first thing is going to require you to go ahead and choose the enrollment that you're recording the service for. So again, if the client does not have an enrollment, you're not going to be able to record a service. So we want to go ahead and choose the appropriate enrollment here. The grant option here is more for sorting purposes, and so based on what grant I choose, it will then show me a list of services that have been matched up to that grant. So for instance, on this grant, and this is training, so it's going to look different, or you'll have different options in production. But for this grant, you see there's two different services that we have options to record. These are the categories listed here in the bold. So these are the actual two services. If I choose a different grant, though, you'll see a different list, a larger list of services. So this just allows you to kind of pare down so you don't see this ginormous list of available services. Once we find the service we want to record, we go ahead and select that. This date here, we want to make sure whatever date we have here is the date that the client is actually receiving the service. You can also click the little calendar icon and change that if it was a different date. Units is how many of this particular service the client is getting, and unit value is the value of that particular service. So for instance, if I was going to say let's say we paid 2 months rent for a client, we could record that as 2 units with a value of, say the rent was $500, and then it'll automatically calculate that as 1,000. So this way it gives you a good way of recording what you've actually provided for the client. It automatically is going to fill in your name as the one that's performing the service. There is a little comment box here, so you can add a comment if that'd be helpful for whatever service you're recording. And then also it's going to have the default restrictions down here. If you are a restricted agency, this is going to default to restrict to organization. If not, it'll stay here for restrict to MOU. And then we would just click Save. And as we can see, now this service is listed here. So as you can see, services is something that's very quick to add versus an enrollment where you're doing all of the assessment questions and all of that. Services is very quick. Another way to record services that can be very helpful, especially if you are recording multiple services for one client on the same day, is the quick service option. To get to quick services, you can either hover over services and then go to quick services, or from the standard services screen that we're on now, you can click on quick services here. Either way, it's going to take you to the same form. First off, we'll have a date. So this is, of course, the date that the client is receiving the service. We'll go ahead and choose the enrollment. Again, choosing the grant is going to filter what services we have available to us. And then you'll actually get a screen where you can actually just check the services that this client is getting on this day. So in this way, if you are providing multiple services to a client, this form is going to help you do this in a much more proficient way than doing the standard services screen. Once we set that, we can go ahead and do save and close. And now you'll note we've just given all 4 of those services to that client. So again, very easy way to record multiple services for one client. Another option is under case notes. If you add case notes to a client, you'll notice at the bottom of that there is an area where you can actually add services as well. And so I'm just going to go ahead and do a test case note. Then here at the bottom, again, you're going to select the enrollment, select the grant, select the service. Over here, if you do need to change the unit value or units, you can change those options over here. And then if you were to click save, it will save that case note and then also save that service. So if we go, even though we recorded that service under case notes, if we go to service, we'll see it listed here as well. So again, regardless of where you're recording the service at, what form you're using, it's all going to be recorded under services. So there's no need to go record it under one form and then go record it under another form. Final way of recording services is actually found on the Home tab. So this is kind of out of the different ways of recording services, this is going to be kind of the most different, and this is called Quick Services Multiple Clients. So again, you want to make sure you are on the Home tab. We want to click Quick Services Multiple Clients. This form is going to be beneficial if you are recording the same service for multiple clients. So, for instance, we're going to go ahead and choose a grant here to get our list of services. We're going to say we gave a case management service yesterday. And what this form will allow you to do is actually select multiple clients to record this one service on this date for. So there's a couple options of selecting clients. One, I can pull up this screen right here with the magnifying glass and I can start typing in my clients' names, selecting them, and then I will still have to select enrollment. And I can keep going down this list, adding all of the different clients that receive this service, build this list up. As you continue on, it's going to keep adding lines, so you can do as many clients as you want. And then once you have those in there, you would just hit save and close, and it's automatically going to then record all those services for those individual clients. Another option you have that could be useful is this option at the bottom here where it says only show clients enrolled in, and then you can select your project. So if we do this, it might do, depending on what web browser, you might get a pop-up, do you want to refresh the search results? I'm going to click OK. Then it's going to give me a list of all the clients that are currently enrolled in this project, and then give me the option of checking them, putting a check mark by their name to go ahead and sign this service to. So this is great if you have a project that doesn't have a huge amount of currently enrolled clients and there's a service that you commonly record for them each day. Maybe you have an emergency shelter and you give them a meal every day. You could easily select that emergency shelter program. You'll see a list of all your currently enrolled clients, select the meal service, and then put a check mark by each of those people that got one, hit save and close. Again, this is a great time saver tool to record services when you have a lot of different people receiving the same service. And again, even if we're recording services on this screen, if we go to pull up the client, we're going to see that service listed under here. And then also, if we ever need to edit a service, we click the little notebook beside the service. That's going to give you option to change the date, change the unit value, also read the comments if we had saved any comment on it. And if we've ever recorded services we didn't need to, you can use the delete button here to delete those. If we've deleted a service and we need to restore it, you can actually go to the recycle bin up here. You'll see any services that have been deleted. You can click on this icon to restore it. Then we'll want to exit the recycle bin, and then we'll see that listed here. So that is services in a nutshell. As always, if you have any questions, please submit a ticket using the help icon up here so that we can reach out and help you. Thank you.
Hi everyone, we're going to cover entry of referrals into the system. So all referrals are going to be logged on the client's workspace. And to open up the main form for referrals, I'm just going to click referrals here on the left, click add new. I want to make sure to attach it to my enrollment. I can change the date the referral is provided here. And I want to choose the referral I'm making. This list will show me all the referrals I have access to, so I know that this is for a path one. I want to pay attention to the prefix that I'm choosing a path referral. We just have generic providers set up, so I'm clicking the spyglass and choosing the generic provider, path provider for now. If I have an outcome, so I want to mark that something is attained, so I know that this client attained the employment assistance, I'm marking the results as service provided. Once I'm done, I click finish, and I can see all the referrals that were logged on this screen here. For path, this is specifically looking at the report is looking just at the number of clients who received a certain type of referral. So I can make as many community mental health referrals as I want, and on the report it's only going to come down as, you know, the one client, just the one client, this client that received the referral, as long as all the date criteria are met for being federally enrolled in the program. So once again, to log a referral, I'm on the client's workspace, I click referrals, I'm going to add new, and then logging through, be sure to choose the correct service from the correct referral service from the drop-down. And if I need to make any edits, I can go in and click that pencil and pad icon and make the change I need to here.
In this video, we'll go over how to record both annual assessments and during program enrollment assessments. These are assessments that you will record after you've already done a standard intake, as a client's situation might change while they are in your project. So to access these assessments, you'll pull up the client, and then on the dashboard of the client record, you will click the small blue action button beside the enrollment that we're wanting to do the updated assessment, annual or during program enrollment, which we'll get into the differences between those in a moment. So I'm going to go ahead and click this action button here, and you'll see an option for update/annual assessment. So the first page is going to bring us up is just the program enrollment screen. This is just a reminder of when the project start date was for each of these clients in this enrollment. So I'm going to go ahead and click no change on that. And then we're going to be presented with the option of, do we want to update an existing assessment or do we want to do a new assessment? Now, the majority of time you would always choose new assessment here. The only reason you would do update existing would be if you have already done an annual or a during program enrollment assessment and you want to go in and update that. Or not really per se update that, but edit it. So if you need to go in and change some of the information on there because you recorded it incorrectly, then if you go in and click on update existing, it will allow you to go in and edit an existing assessment. So I'm going to go ahead and click on new assessment, And now we're going to get two options here. Do we want to do a during program enrollment assessment or an annual assessment? These are very close to the same thing as far as the data they record. So both of these are going to walk you through a workflow, and they're going to go through some assessments that we're already familiar with on intake when we first enroll a client. The main differences between the two of these is during program enrollment you can do at any point of a client's enrollment. So we could have enrolled a client a month ago, and now we find out they have increased their income, and so we want to be able to record that change so that we can show that our project is helping this person. Well, we can go in and do a during program enrollment even though it's only been a month since they were enrolled, and then it would allow us to go ahead and record those changes. An annual assessment, on the other hand, is something that normally is just used for compliance reporting. So certain project types are required to do annual assessments, and this is an assessment that falls within a certain date range. The exact date range is either 30 days within 30 days past or 30 days previous to the anniversary of the client's enrollment. So if a client was enrolled a year ago today, I would have this 60-day time frame window to record an annual assessment, either 30 days after that anniversary date or 30 days before. And so those are the main differences here. So I'm going to go ahead, for training purposes, we'll just start with a during program enrollment. And you'll see here we're going to have a date right here, so we just want to make sure this is the date we're actually doing this assessment. So if we had assessed the client a couple days ago, we would just want to make sure we go in and update that like that. Using the default last insurance status here is going to save you a little bit of time. It'll automatically fill in whatever was recorded for the client previously, but it'll still give you an opportunity to change it. So if they did have health insurance now, we could go and update that. I'll go ahead and click save there. Based on the project type, it's going to go through whatever assessments are required. I'm doing a street outreach project right now, which is why it's asking about the connection with SOAR. Barriers, it's automatically going to fill in what was recorded previously, but then give you an opportunity to update this. So if maybe they do have another barrier that has happened to them, they can go ahead and you can go ahead and record that. Here's where that button will save you some time as well, using the default last assessment to pull in those numbers. But again, always, regardless of using this button, you always want to make sure that this information here is the most current as of this date. So you want to interview the client and see if they maybe are getting some other income or non-cash benefits at this point. And then this next field is another field that's exclusive to street outreach. So I'm going to go ahead and record contact here. Click save. Now it's going to switch over to the next person within the household. So it's going to switch over to the spouse. It's going to ask the same thing. So if we wanted to do an assessment for them as well, we could do that. We can see here now the spouse's name was up top, and it would walk us all the way through for this adult and then eventually for the child. And so that's how you would do a during program enrollment assessment. So the other type of assessment that happens ongoing after a client's enrolled is the annual one. So I'll go ahead and go back to the page we were at here where we said we're going to do a new assessment, and this time I'm just going to say an annual assessment. Now we know based on the enrollment screen that we were just on, this client that I've got pulled up right here was enrolled on 9/26/17, 16. So let's say that was a year ago today. So going forward, now if we're saying we're going to do an annual assessment, then this date right here needs to be within that 60-day time frame. So we could do most of October, it could be anywhere in here, or any time in September. That would be within that time frame. If we try to do an annual assessment outside of that time frame, we'll actually get a warning to let you know the assessment date is outside the 60-day window of the annual assessment, and it gives you a reminder when the anniversary date is, and lets you know if you do save one outside of it, it might cause data quality and reporting errors. And if you submit an APR, you might have ran into this where it shows there's missing income data, and it can be because there has not been a proper annual assessment. So when we're doing annual assessments, we do always want to make sure it is in that time frame. So knowing this date, then I would want to go ahead and make sure that I'm assessing the client within that time frame. Also, if you've already done an annual assessment, you might get this warning as well. It says an annual assessment already exists for the enrollment in the 60-day window. And you really only want to do one annual assessment per client for each year. So this is something that, now if a client stays in a project for 2 years or more, you would do another annual assessment at that point. But you really only want to do one annual assessment per year for each client. Again, you can do it during program enrollment assessment as many times as you want, but annual should just happen once a year. Another thing to note, and this is a HUD regulation, is that we know that for a client, or at least the head of household, each annual assessment should be based around the 1 year anniversary or 2 year or so forth anniversary of the client's enrollment. However, other family members that are enrolled as well, regardless of their enrollment date, which would be their project start date here, they should get an annual assessment based on the head of household's enrollment date. So if an easy way to think about this is if the head of household needs an annual assessment, now you would just do an annual assessment both for them as well as the other members of the household. And again, it will walk you through that as you go to record an annual assessment. It's going to do the adult, and when you get to the end of that, it'll automatically switch over to the family members, and you would just keep going through all of that until you get all the way through there. Also, when you are back on the dashboard, if you look at the last assessment completed, this is going to give you a heads up if you have done an annual assessment or when the last time you did an assessment for this client. So we can see here they were enrolled on 9/26/16, but we have done an enrollment or done an updated assessment on 9/27/17. Also, just a quick reminder of if you need to edit one, you can go in, instead of saying new, update existing, click on that, and then we can go in and edit any information that we have previously saved for that. One more final thing I wanted to show you is a tool we have in here to help see which clients need to have an annual assessment done. And again, that's going to be based on your project type, but this form will actually just show you all your enrollments and when the most recent assessment was done. So if you go to the home workspace under My Client track, hover over current enrollments and then click on open enrollments with most recent assessment. This will let you select a project, and this will let you select how many days since a client has had a assessment. So when was the last assessment? How many days ago? So if I said 50, for instance, we see this whole list of clients, when they were enrolled, when their most recent assessment date was. So for instance here, they were enrolled December 2016, and that's also their most recent assessment. So we can say they've not had an annual assessment, they've not had a during program enrollment assessment. Something that might be helpful would be, one, if you type in 365 here, you would see any potential records that do need a annual assessment. If you type in something a little lower, and there might not be any here that match this, you can start to see people that their anniversary is coming up, so you can go ahead and know to go ahead and get that information from the client so you can record it. So here we can see this person is, their last assessment is the same date they were enrolled, December 16. So by the time December rolls around this year, then we would need to go ahead and do a annual assessment for them. So that is annual and during program enrollment assessments. Is a great way, even if you're not required to do annual assessments, doing during program enrollment assessments is a great way to monitor your project's performance as clients increase their income, as they work through barriers, as they might get health insurance, they might not have health insurance when they first come in, and then they gain it, and that kind of thing. So I definitely encourage you to utilize that feature. In this training video, we'll be going over how to do an exit workflow on a client. This is the way that you would exit a client from your project once they are no longer in it. So the first thing you'd want to do would be to pull up your client. You can either use the Find Client option here in the top left. You could search their name here in the global search bar, or if you're on the Home tab, you could actually look at your current enrollments, select the project from here, and then select the client by clicking on that icon. So regardless of how you get to it, once you have your client pulled up, you'll see a blue action button beside the particular enrollment that we're wanting to do the exit on. We want to click on that, and then we want to hit exit the enrollment. Somewhere where people get confused is there is an option to delete enrollment. You would never want to delete the enrollment unless that client was never enrolled in that project, and so they were just enrolled incorrectly. That's the only reason why that option's there. So for the majority of the time, exit the enrollment is the option that you would want to choose here. So the first question here is going to say, what's the exit date? So if this is the actual date they exited, it will default to today. Then you're good to leave that. If not, maybe they exited a few days ago and you're just now getting around to keying it into the system, then you can go ahead and choose that date here by clicking on that calendar icon. Next question is going to be destination. I definitely recommend that you get familiar with these different destinations, as some of them are closely related, but they are different. And so as you get more familiar with it, you will be able to record the most accurate destination for your client. So something I would just point out here, staying or living with family temporary and staying or living with friends temporary is one option, or is two options you have here. If you scroll down, there's also staying or living with family or friends permanent. So those are two totally different destinations. One is just temporary, one is permanent. There is other options as well, deceased, if someone passed away while in your project, and then a lot of other different options. So again, get familiar with these so that you can record what's most accurate here. Also, a unique option on here is no exit interview complete. This is a little different than all the rest of them. If you select this option, there will actually not be any further assessment questions asked through this workflow. Reason being, if you choose this would be the option if a client has just disappeared and you do not know any of the information on them as they are leaving. So again, once you choose that and we hit save, this would go ahead and in the exit assessment or exit workflow, there wouldn't be any assessment questions following. So for training purposes, we are going to go ahead and choose a particular location that they are going to so that we can see the full workflow of exiting a client. Next question here, for this particular project, it's not required that we include an exit reason, but you can record the exit reason here if you would like. So we're going to say this client completed the program. End case assignment, if that's left checked like that, that just goes ahead and ends the case assignment for whatever case manager this client was assigned to. If you uncheck this, it's not going to not exit them. They will still get exited. They would just still be assigned to a particular case manager. We'll go ahead and click save on this. At this point, the client would show exited from the system. However, there are some exit assessments we need to do so that we don't have missing data. And so you want to continue through this workflow and answer those questions. So the first one here is going to be the health insurance question. Now something that will save you some time while doing an exit is you have this default last insurance status, and this is a button that you will see on several of the forms as we exit people. What this will do is bring in the answers from the previous time we assessed this client, whether that was the intake or maybe an annual assessment. But then it will give you an opportunity to change that. So for instance, if we said, well, now they do have health insurance, we would go ahead and choose yes and choose which one that is. And then that would be a positive for your project because you'd be able to say see that they came in without health insurance, and now as they are leaving, they do have health insurance. So we'll go ahead and click save on that. This will bring up the barriers page. It's automatically going to pull in what particular barriers you had selected on the last assessment. So here's where we would be able to modify this. And again, we're not actually modifying or editing the original intake assessment that we completed. This is just doing a separate assessment that's just tied to the exit so that we can see the difference between the two. We can go ahead and do save and close on that. And then income is going to be the same way. Using the default last assessment button is going to save you a lot of time by filling in this information. But again, we don't want to just do default last assessment and go save and close without looking over this information and then verifying with the client that this information is still accurate. So for instance, if maybe they have a job now, we would be able to go ahead and record that here as well. Make sure they're still getting these benefits for these same amounts. You can update the amounts. Maybe they're getting more here. And then we go ahead and do save and close when that's accurate. Now, because this was a family, so there were more than one person enrolled in this project, it's now going to ask if we also want to exit the other family member. So what this does is this gives you an option if maybe you have an enrollment where one person is exiting the project but another is staying, you could leave that other person still in the project. For training purposes, we will go ahead and we'll say no, that we're going to leave this other person in the project. And we will click finish. And once you get to the finish, you can pretty much guarantee yourself that you have answered all the exit assessment questions. You haven't skipped any. It'll take you back to the dashboard. Here we can see that for our client here, Catherine, they do have an exit date, so they are indeed exited. Also, a couple helpful tips here. If you exited somebody by accident and needed to get rid of that, if you were to click the blue action button beside their enrollment and click re-enter the enrollment, as long as it's been within the last 90 days that they've been exited, you can do that and it will just get rid of the exit. So it's like they never exited before. So something to know about there. Also, if you need to update the exit information, maybe you chose the wrong date for the exit, maybe you chose the wrong destination, the way you update the exit is just go back to exit the enrollment even though they've already been exited, and then it would give you an opportunity to modify that information. Hit save. And then it would continue to walk through the workflow. At this point, because we've already made the change we need to, it would be safe to cancel the workflow. Also, I forgot to mention while doing the exit, because it is a standard workflow, just like when we do an intake, there is a pause button there. So at any point while you're doing an exit, you can pause the workflow. If you need to go pull up a different client, or you're heading out for the day and you're not going to be able to finish it, and then once it's paused, you can go to pause workflows and then resume that. So that is how to exit a client. Hopefully it has been informational and has made sense. As always, if you have any issues, click the help icon, submit a ticket.
Hi everyone. In this section we'll be going through privacy settings. Clients have several options for if or when they choose to share. We'll go through the definitions, functional use cases, and some examples. First, let's recap on some basic concepts. When you sign into the system, you are always part of an organization or as agent or organization or agency, sometimes referred to as a security organization. When we mark something as restrict to my org, we're talking about restricting the data so that just those logged in under that agency can see it. So here you see I'm logged in as my training organization. Anything I mark as restrict to org, someone has to be signed in as my training organization to see it. When we talk about consent to share, we're talking about sharing to organizations that are part of the Georgia HMIS MOU. We have that single shared MOU with everyone. Second, when you're signed in under your specific account with its own user ID. The system will always display the data you entered. For those of you who enter data in multiple organizations, this is something you'll have to keep in mind when you're checking for security. Also, there's a difference between your transactional data, like your enrollments, your services, and the privacy setting for the client record itself. The client record restriction, which is under Edit Client Information Release, this controls the ability for other people to search and prevent duplicate client records. And so it also acts like a main gatekeeper for other transaction sharing. Transaction restrictions, and that means for services, enrollments, or assessments, or anywhere where you see the restrict to org plugin, this right here. You're just either marking as consent to share or restrict to my organization for just that piece of information. So here on this screen, if I mark this as restrict to my organization, I am only restricting this piece of data, nothing else. So those are our basic reminders and basic definitions. So let's look at some examples and use cases. We're going to start with existing clients since they're much simpler to work with. And here, existing just means that they're already in the system. You can search and find them. Someone has already seen them. Someone has already enrolled them. If clients want to keep sharing at just demographics only, so other case managers can search for them, see that they exist, but they don't really want to share any enrollment history, services, assessments, anything like that, we're going to make sure to keep the consent to share basic identifying information only. That's going to prevent any project data from being seen by other organizations, and so you'll have to be logged in as that agency to see it. For existing clients, some of them will consent to share all of their information, and by updating the information release to share basic identifying information and shared project data, that means that the client's enrollment history and assessment data, transaction data that they've already consented to share will open up. And so to clarify, information like case notes, barriers, or other assessments or transactions that are already marked as restrict to org, they will not be shared by opening up the record. It is just information that the client has already consented to share. Now, if we have clients that want to share some of the information, that's when it gets a little bit trickier. So typically in share some information, in general, they'll still want to share basic identifying information and project data, but they'll want to selectively restrict something. That could be a particular service, a particular enrollment, a particular assessment. In those cases, what we're doing is we're on that very particular piece of data that the client does not want to share, we're marking that as restrict to my organization. So here I just restricted this contact, this piece of information, to only those that are logged in as my training organization can see it. If a client ever changes their mind, so they were sharing before, they didn't want to share, or now they don't, they want to share some piece of information. If we're looking at individual transactions, we can go in and mark that as consent to share. If we're looking at the client record, maybe they were sharing everything and they did not renew, they didn't renew that consent. So we want to mark that back down to sharing basic identifying information only. Now there's a level of restriction that's for new clients only. So when they first come see your agency, they've never been seen before, and they say absolutely zero sharing. They don't even want anyone else to be able to search for them. For that, when you do a project intake, you always want to choose add new client. And that means that you're going to be getting a client record that no one else is using, no one else has seen. And then once you've gone through the intake workflow for that, you're going into the information release and you're marking that as restrict to my organization. You'll see some additional warnings, and that if I didn't create this client record, you'll get warnings saying that you will lose access to it. This is something that was migrated under one of the moves from Pathways from the old database. You will be prevented from saving this, as you will cut off everyone's access to this record. Last, there is an ability for clients to opt out of participating in any research, and this is regardless of any privacy settings they have for anything else. We have that in our document check feature, which is nested under Edit Client. So we'll go to Document Check, Add New, and we'll choose the Opt Out of Research. We'll add the fields that are required. We can keep the information date there. If we have the signed consent form in a scanned version, we can upload that file with this document check, but it's not required. And when we click Save, we've uploaded and identified that the client does not consent for any type of research. So we covered the different sharing scenarios, and just some key reminders. If someone wants to share demographics only, we want to keep that at share basic identifying information, basic demographics. They can search for them. If a new client wants to prevent all sharing, we have to create a new client record and choose Restrict to My Organization for the new one we just created. And last, case notes, barriers, and protected agencies have their transactions defaulted to Restrict to My Organization. So regardless of what other information release settings are here, if a transaction is marked as Restrict to Org, it will not be shared. Thank you, everyone.
In this training video, I'll be going over how issue management works in ClientTrack. Issue management is how you are able to submit an issue ticket when you're having trouble with the system or have a question, and then an admin will get a notification that an issue has been submitted, and we are able to work on those issues for you. So a cool thing about ClientTrack is regardless of what tab you're on, what page you're on, what form you have pulled up, you can submit an issue straight from there. And when you do that, the system will automatically record specific information regarding what form you happen to be on and what client you have pulled up and so forth that will actually help us diagnose the issue you're having. So for instance here, I'm going to actually kind of create an issue by not answering this question and trying to hit save. I get an error message here. And let's say I was unfamiliar with this error message, or I did not know what to do now to correct this. Well, you can go up here to the top right and you'll see a help icon. Go ahead and click on that. These top 3 options here will help you submit a ticket. The first one is for if you're actually having just an issue. So there's something going on, you're getting an error message, there's a problem in the system. The second one is ask a question. Maybe you just need to know, hey, what's a good report for me to pull some data on services? And then third, make a suggestion. Maybe you just have a suggestion that would be good for a future update of ClientTrack. Regardless of what 3 of these you choose, they all go through issue tracking, and we all get a notification to let us know that there's something that's been submitted, and we will go in and then look at it. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Report an Issue. Now the first thing here is the summary. We do want to be pretty detailed on the summary. This will help us as admins help solve your problem and know what's going on right off the bat, and it's also going to help you organize issues that you have previously submitted. So you don't want to just do a one-word summary. You don't want to just say APR not working. You want to give a little detail. So for this issue, I will say getting an error message. And then here you want to go ahead and go into a little bit more detail on exactly what's going on. And I would definitely tell you, the more details you can get to us, the better. A lot of times we'll get an issue ticket and it will have very limited amount of information on what the actual problem is, and so then what we have to do is we have to send a reply back to you asking for more information, and you have to wait, for us to send that back, and then we have to wait for you to reply back to that, and it just takes it a lot longer for us to resolve your problem. So the more information you can provide, the better. If you take a little time on this step, it will probably end up helping you to get this issue resolved quicker. If you see this option here, you can attach a file or screenshot. If there's a file that would be helpful for this issue, you can do that through here by choosing a file and then selecting a file. That could be maybe a report you've already ran. It could be maybe Excel sheet or something like that. You can also attach a screenshot if you'd saved a copy of a screenshot. Speaking of screenshots, if you're not familiar how those work, on your keyboard there is a button in the top right that should say Print Screen. If you click Print Screen, and I'm going to go ahead and click Print Screen now, and then if you right click within this box here, you can hit Paste, and it will actually paste that screenshot. So you can basically just take a snapshot of your screen, and that would be helpful if you're maybe getting a specific error message or seeing something unusual on your screen and not sure what that means. You can take a screenshot of it and then still go ahead and type a description here though to kind of help us understand what the problem is. So once you have that information there, you can go ahead and scroll down. Now, view debug information. This would probably not be anything that you need to go in and click on, but I will show you what it contains. And this is why I was saying it's so important that you submit the issue directly from the page that you're having a problem with. Through this, we're going to be able to know what client you were working with, what agency you were logged into at the time, what form you were on, and then there's a good bit of more information here. And so that's going to be really helpful for us as admins to help troubleshoot your problem. And now I've been covering what you should include on issues, and for a moment I want to talk about what you should not include when you submit an issue. So when you submit an issue, it does send an email notification out to us, and in that email notification we get information from the summary, and we also get information that you would type here. Now we would not see the screenshot through the email, but we would get whatever's typed out here. And why that's important is you do not want to include personal identifiable information on a client within this. And so what we would say here, for instance, say we had a specific client we're working with, you wouldn't use their name here. You would say client ID, having issue saving, something like that. And then the same way here, if there's a particular client you're talking about, just use client ID. So we don't want to use names, birth dates, socials here. Continuing on, this information right here should automatically fill out with your email address and your phone number. If it doesn't, please fill that out. Also, please make sure this is updated, because this is how you will get notifications that we have in fact worked on your issue, we've assigned it to somebody, we have replied to it, and we're looking for a response for you. So you really want to make sure this email is correct. And then notify additional people. This would allow you to add another user to be notified that this issue has been submitted. That could be used in a way, maybe you have a director that you want to let them know that, hey, there was an issue, but you submitted a ticket, that's why you haven't ran this report that you were trying to get to them, that kind of thing. Once we have all this information filled out, we can go ahead and click submit. And then this will go ahead and submit the issue within ClientTrack, and then we will get notifications through email to let us know that there has been an issue submitted. Now, submitting an issue is kind of half of issue management. The other part is going to be, once an issue has already been submitted, how that issue is handled and responded to, and there might be a response needed from you as a user, or you might have something else to add after you've already submitted an issue. You might have another comment or something else that you figured out in the system in regards to that issue. So to pull up your previously submitted issues, you want to make sure you're on the Home tab, and then under My ClientTrack here, you will see an icon for My Submitted Issues. And when you click on My Submitted Issues, by default here you will get all the issues you've submitted except issues that have already been marked as closed. Now there's kind of 4 statuses that you will probably see while we're working on issues. One is not assigned. That means we have probably not began to look at this issue yet. The first thing we would do when we look at an issue is we go ahead and assign it, and so that will be assigned either to a system admin or a COC admin, depending on what's appropriate. So then you'll see your issues going to assigned, and that means we are actively working on it then. Then the next stage would be fixed, verify, needed. And so when we go in and we feel like we've made a fix for something, we go ahead and mark it as fixed, verify, needed. That gives you an opportunity to go in and verify it to make sure it is indeed fixed, and then you can go ahead and close it. So in a nutshell, those are kind of the different stages that issues can be in. To pull up an issue, you would click this little pencil icon. So for instance, this is the issue we just submitted. So if I click this pencil icon here, I would go ahead and see that whole ticket. That's the screenshot I included and the text I included here. And then you'd also see any notes that were left here by any admins. And so, like I said, when we leave notes, you will get an email notification to let you know that you need to go in and check your My Submitted Issues to see what the note is we left. And in the email you'll get, it will have the issue ID, so you can easily pull up the specific issue. Now if you need to reply to a message we've left on a note, you can do that by clicking New Note, and you can leave your reply here and then scroll down and hit Save the Note. You always want to leave Send Email checked. That is just going to send a notification to let everybody know, or to let us know as admins, that you have replied to it as well. So this is kind of how we can have conversations within an issue and communicate, what's going on and if we need any more information. Now eventually we are going to go in and mark this issue as fixed as we come up with a solution for it. So once we do that, and we'll say how we fixed it, or that we did fix it. Once we did that, then when you go under My Submitted Issues, you're going to see this status, Fixed, Verify Needed. This would mean you would want to just go in, read the note, if it's applicable, go in and make sure it is fixed, and then you could go ahead and click Verify Issue. And just click Verify again there, and then that's going to let us know like you went in and verified it, and now it's actually going to be marked as closed. So as you can see now, it doesn't even show up here. The way we'd get it to show up here is if we were to click Closed, it would now show Closed Issues. You can also go in and close an issue yourself. So if you submitted an issue and then the next day you figured that problem out, you can actually open up your issue and go to Close Issue, say why you fixed it, scroll down and click Save Note and Close Issue. That can be really important because if you submitted an issue but then didn't need any more help with it, when you go close it out, we're not going to look at it anymore, and that will save us a lot of time so we can work on issues that are current in the system. Also, if there was an issue you submitted previously, even if it was a while back and you're still having that problem, and maybe we had already marked it as fixed and you thought it was fixed but find out it's not, instead of submitting another issue, it would actually be better to go into that closed issue, that older closed issue, and you can actually go in, click this little icon up here, and you can say mark this issue as not fixed, and it's going to say what is still wrong. You would put the information there, scroll down, save the note, and mark the issue as not fixed. That's going to keep the system working a lot more efficiently instead of having multiple issues submitted on the same problem, and then it also will give us a good history of the problem, how it started, and some good information on that. So again, learning how this issue tracking works and learning how to submit good issue tickets will really make this system work great for you guys and also help us efficiently work on these problems.